Welcome back to Raised by Giants, where we talk all things spirituality. I'm Ryder Lee. On this episode, we have investigative journalist, author, and filmmaker Bart Sibrel speaking about astronauts gone wild, a funny thing happened on the moon, and much more. But before I introduce him, check out Raised by Giants on Rockfin. It is a completely uncensored platform. Go over there, set up a free account, get all of my regular content I post here on YouTube, and sign up for Rockfin's premium content, which is far less than a YouTube premium account, at only $10 a month. And you'll get all of my premium uncensored content when it gets released, and all of the other creators' premium content as well, like Beyond Classified, Charlie Robinson, Jay Dyer, Zero with Sam Tripoli, Tinfoil Hat, Eddie Bravo, and Rex Bear Leak Project, and much more. Check the link in the description to sign up for the video streaming platform Rockfin. Also, check out C60 Purple Power. It is the most powerful antioxidant on the planet. Helps with energy levels, skin problems, infections, eyesight, brain cognition, EMF radiation, and a lot more. It's a free radical sponge that gives your body the ability to heal itself. And if you use promo code GIANTS10 from the link in the description, you'll get 10% off your entire purchase. Bart Sibrel, welcome to the show. It's an honor and a privilege to have you on. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, Ryder. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. And man, I got to tell you, your documentary, Astronauts Gone Wild, is probably the best thing that I've seen all year. And I know it's an older film, but I don't know how I didn't see this documentary earlier. I mean, I knew that you were the guy that Buzz Aldrin punched in the face. With something like that, happening to you, that you'll probably live with that forever. But man, just the opening scenes of this documentary of you trying to get all of the astronauts to swear on the Bible that they walked on the moon is hysterical. Uh, did you ask
Let me
all?
ask you, did you see a funny thing happened on the way to the moon?
Yes.
Okay, so you have seen that. Because sometimes people have seen astronauts gone wild, but not a funny thing happened on the way to the moon, or the other way around. I bumped into a guy who said, "You're Bart Sibrel. I've seen a funny thing happened on the way to the moon 50 times, no joke, 50 times." And then I said, "Well, what do you think about astronauts gone wild?" He goes, "What's that?" Now, how can you not know of that? It just shows you internet search, censorship. It's like most people, half Americans don't know about Building 3. How can someone be such a fan of a funny thing happened on the way to the moon and not have never heard of astronauts gone wild? That's weird. Or the worst happens when people see astronauts gone wild, which, isn't that polished compared to a funny thing. And I would really rather they see a funny thing happen on the way to the moon first as a setup, because once you know that they did fake the moon landing, then astronauts gone wild makes more sense to you. So anyway, so you saw a funny thing happen on the way to the moon first.
Yes, I did. And then I watched Astronauts Gone Wild because I do research on everyone that I bring on because I do it all myself. I reach out to the individuals that I want to bring on my show, and then I try and watch everything that they've done before. Or if they have a book, I try and read their book. But I did not get a chance to read your book because it was kind of in a short kind of time frame. But normally I book them out far enough in advance to be able to read their book and watch all of their material. And yes, the funny thing that happened on the way to the moon was really interesting because you had this classified footage that proves that they said that they were halfway to the moon when they really weren't halfway to the moon. So I think this is a really good place to start, and we'll try and get into astronauts gone wild after. How did you get a hold of this footage? Well, I guess first explain the footage in detail.
Now, which footage are you talking about?
The one where they put the panel up on the window and then they faked that they were
Oh,
halfway to the moon and then that they weren't. Then when they removed the panel, that little insert, they removed that and then you seen the Earth really close to the shuttle.
Well, a funny thing happened on the way to the moon, which people can see at Sibrel.com. I just realized my name there on the screen. It says Bart Sibrel. Normally, I changed that to Sibrel.com. I was trying to figure a way to do that. So basically, if you can go to Sibrel.com, the book that I just published is called Moon Man, The True Story of a Filmmaker on the CIA Hit List. And it basically showcases newly discovered classified footage of fake photography from the first mission to the moon. That's what was dynamic about A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon. The film was financed by a board member of an aerospace company who builds rockets for NASA, who knows that the moon missions were fake. And he's a multimillionaire and gave us $1 million to expose the moon landing fraud because he thinks it's part of his patriotic duty. So in the course of this 7-year production, I mean, just to edit the 47-minute film, I spent about 2 years, or 4,000 hours, 40 hours a week for 2 years, just to edit a 47-minute film. And basically, we uncovered classified footage of fake photography from the alleged first mission to the moon, which is NASA footage. And when you pop in the tape, it says do not show to the public. So if people just go to Sibrel.com, the book Moon Man that just came out is interactive. There are 16 video clips throughout the book. So basically, I write a chapter and say, now look at link 1, write a chapter, look at link 2, so you know what I'm talking about in the book. So people can see these videos for free. Just go to Sibrel, S as in Sam, I, B as in boy, R-E-L, my last name, Sibrel.com. And you can see A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, which cost, nearing $1 million to produce, that has this footage in it. And the crew of Apollo 11 is faking being halfway to the moon. I asked NASA for unedited footage, and everything that they send out is pre-edited. They don't even have the launch from T minus a minute down to 0 without editing, from 60 seconds to 30 seconds. I mean, it's really remarkable. They don't want you to get unedited footage of the mission. This particular tape someone at NASA gave me is unedited. You pop in the tape, it says do not show to the public on the screen. It's dated by NASA's own atomic clock, 2 days into the flight, where they're supposed to be halfway to the moon. Now, NASA aired about maybe 20 seconds of the best part of this footage, including a segment where we catch Neil Armstrong lying, saying we're 130,000 miles out. And right before that, actually, he asks NASA, he says, well, how far do your computers say that we're out? And then he repeats it back. Well, he has the most advanced computer on the planet right there beside him, but he's still in Earth orbit. So it says 250 miles away from the Earth, which is where the space station is. They never left Earth orbit. And what a surprise, 50 years later, they still cannot leave Earth orbit. That's why there's mannequins orbiting the moon on the Artemis mission. So he asked NASA, how far do you have us out? Because they were all running a computer program. A computer operator, after the launch, said that they could tell no difference whatsoever between a simulation and an actual flight, just a bunch of numbers going by on the screen. So Neil Armstrong didn't want to contradict the simulation that was running. How far do you have us out? And then he says for the segment they aired, we're calling in from 130,000 miles out, because he was just told. That's what the distance to computer said. And basically, you see a little blue Earth with black around it that allegedly is the camera at the window's glass of the spacecraft looking back at the Earth far away, halfway to the moon. Well, the lights come up. The camera's actually away from the glass at the back of the spacecraft. They've turned out the lights, and the Earth is partially outside the window in Earth orbit, but it looks like the Earth floating in space. They basically created a 1-foot model, pretending that it's the Earth floating in space. The lights come up. You see it's a 1-foot model of the Earth that they're faking from the spacecraft. And there's a third track of audio of the CIA telling them not to answer NASA right away, because that would give away the fact that they're really close to the Earth, because there should be, according to their calculations, a 2-second radio delay to go out and a 2-second to come back. So we hear the CIA telling them to wait 4 seconds and then talk and then, create a fake radio delay. All that is on the tape too. So when I saw that 3.5 years into the 7-year project that I was producing under the theory it might be true that they faked it, lo and behold, I catch them faking being halfway to the moon. And I'm like, okay, they're clearly faking being halfway to the moon, which means they cannot go halfway to the moon. Otherwise, we'd be seeing real footage of the real Earth out the window. So if they can't go halfway to the moon, it means they can't leave Earth orbit. And if they're faking being halfway to the moon, it means they never left Earth orbit. It means they never went. I showed this footage to the news director at NBC, where I worked in the news department. He turned pale white, collapsed in his chair, and said, "Oh my gosh, this absolutely proves they did not walk on the moon. They never left Earth orbit." I said, "Yeah, what do we do?" He thought about it and then said, believe it or not, "I cannot broadcast this. It will cause a civil war. I will not go down in history as the man who caused the next American Civil War." 10 years go by, we get another news director at NBC. They see the same footage. They're also 100% convinced that it proves they did not go to the moon. They fly me to NBC headquarters in New York. They interview me, put me up in the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, pay me thousands of dollars for exclusive license to air this footage nationwide. Breaking news, the moon landings are fake. They canceled the program, the producer told me, because they got a call from the United States federal government threatening them not to do it. So this is the state of affairs. It's not a theory that they didn't go to the moon. It's a fact. We have 4 proofs that anyone by themselves would prove it. So we have 4 times the evidence necessary that proves they didn't go to the moon. The first is simply deductive reasoning. Today, with 50 years better technology, NASA can only send an astronaut 250 miles into space and no further. That's why there's mannequins orbiting the moon. Okay, so the moon is 1,000 times farther than that. So what they're saying is that 50 years ago, when all of NASA combined had 1/1,000,000th the computing power of a cell phone, they sent an astronaut 1,000 times farther than they can do today with 50 years better technology. Well, that means that they're claiming that they had greater technology in the past than in the future. But wait a minute, that's a historic and scientific impossibility, which means the 1969 claim was a forgery. That's what it means. Then if you want me to do screen share, I can show you one picture that proves that they didn't go to the moon. And it's of the shadows intersecting. If you want me to share that, I will. Do you want me to share it? You have to enable it.
Gotcha.
So basically, let me clean up my desktop here. And I'll and let me know when I've got permission to share.
You have permission.
Okay, go back to here, share screen. I'm going to share my desktop, and you should basically see this. And I don't know if I can get rid of that, move that over here. And so here's the picture. This picture on the left is the way that shadows look in sunlight. Okay. This is 2 telephone poles. They're about 5 feet apart. This is sunlight. The sun's 93 million miles away. It's 1,000,000 times bigger than the Earth. It's going to cast shadows in sunlight in the same direction, parallel with one another, always 100% of the time. It's impossible for shadows from 2 objects 5 feet apart to intersect in sunlight. Okay. Now the moon with no atmosphere is 20 times brighter than it is on Earth in a desert at noon. So the last thing you need is artificial lighting, right? Here's a picture on the right that's allegedly from the last mission to the moon, proving they never went. Here, the astronaut shadow is going at 12 o'clock, and a rock about 5 feet away, the shadow is going at 9 o'clock. That's a 90-degree difference from objects 5 feet apart. This is impossible in sunlight, which means it was taken with electrical light, which means they're on Earth, which means they didn't go to the moon. You can talk about the flag waving, you can talk about anything you want to talk about. This picture proves they did not go to the moon. End of story, right? So then we have the third proof, and I could show that too. I could queue up the classified footage of fake photography. I probably have it, not too far away here. New window. Here's my window here. Little advertisement for Brave browser. You go to Sibrel.com. And here's the book, which you can get on audio, Kindle, or print. I read the audio book. You go to Moonman video links. These are the interactive links. Go to link number 2. A funny thing happened on the way to the moon. So here we are. This is supposed to be the Earth floating in space. They said so. This is 130,000 miles out. Well, we have the unedited version. Okay. So you actually see that's a work light inside the spacecraft. That's a circular window, and you're seeing part of the Earth outside of the window from Earth orbit. Makes it look like the Earth floating in space.
Looks a little lumpy there. Looks a little lumpy there, Bart.
Yeah, well, they're moving. They put a fake Terminator line in the window, and they basically, are faking being halfway to the moon. They said the lens is at the windows of glass, but that's a lie. It's at the back of the back of the spacecraft, and you see the very bright and near Earth out the window. So this is them. They claim this is the Earth looking back. They claim they have the lens at the windows of glass, as it would have to be to shoot the Earth far away. This is supposed to be the Earth floating in space when they're halfway to the moon. But in fact, this is a circular window of the spacecraft. These are the walls of the spacecraft. They've turned out the lights and they've closed the iris, all of which they talk about because they thought this would be edited out. Here's an astronaut moving something in front of the window, proving that's part of the Earth out the window from Earth orbit. It's a very clever forgery. And then you see the lights come up and the real location of the camera, which is at the back of the spacecraft, not against the glass. They lied. They were not 130,000 miles out. They were really in Earth orbit. And what a surprise. 50 years later, they can still not leave Earth orbit. So that's the third proof. And then we get down to the fourth proof that is in the book and not the movie. Look at this gentleman. This gentleman's name is Cyrus Eugene Akers. He was chief of security at Cannon Air Force Base in 1968. My father was in the Air Force. I'm pretty familiar with the Air Force. I never heard of Cannon Air Force Base. I had to look it up. It's tiny, fewer eyewitnesses. And every branch of the military has their special ops intelligence division. The Army has it, the Navy has it, the Marines have it, and the Air Force has it. Guess where it's located? The Special Ops Intelligence Headquarters for the United States Air Force is located at Cannon Air Force Base in Clovis, New Mexico, where this man, Cyrus Eugene Akers, was chief of security at the Air Force's most secretive Air Force base. On his deathbed, he confessed, and this is not in the book, I'm only saying this in the interview because his son just passed away. He confessed he murdered a coworker. He's dying. He wants to get right with God. He confessed, I'm a murderer. I murdered a close friend at work at Cannon Air Force Base because he and his friend eyewitnessed the faking of the moon landing June 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of 1968. He stood beside President Johnson while they filmed the faking of the moon landing. His friend was going to tell the public because he thought it was morally wrong for the United States government to fake the moon landing. We don't know whether he took this as his own initiative or Johnson ordered him to do it, but he murdered a coworker to keep the moon landing fraud a secret. That's what he confessed on his deathbed. You don't make that stuff up. Now, He gave us that list of 15 people that President Johnson personally gave him. And if I go to my files over here, I'll get out my book. Where it is, books, Moon Man, Moon Man Final, and Moon Man PDF. All right, we'll go down to about page 156. This is the book. You can get it at Sibrel.com in Kindle, print, or audio. I read it myself. President Johnson gave him a list of 15 VIP eyewitnesses who were allowed in to witness the faking of the moon landing and no one else. He was given that list by President Johnson, and we published this list in the book, and some of these people are still alive today. Let's go ahead and show you that list. Some of these people I knew who they were, and some of them I never heard of. One of them on the list is Robert Emenaker. He's a science fiction writer. He spent his whole life saying the moon landings are real and UFOs are real. So I suspect UFOs are about as real as the moon landing, right?
Yep.
You see? So here's the list. 15 people allowed in at Cannon Air Force Base. President Johnson gave him this list. He gave it to his son, who gave it to me. Lyndon Johnson, President of the United States. Neil Armstrong, NASA astronaut. Edwin Aldrin, NASA astronaut. They weren't even in the spacesuits. They were observing actors in there who were actually in better shape than they were. We think Bruce Lee was one of those people. They had to have the air conditioning units removed so they wouldn't fall over backwards. They were designed for 1/6 gravity. It took incredible endurance to stay inside of that suit for long periods of time without air conditioning. And so they weren't even in there. They were observing. Werner von Braun, the guy who designed the rocket. Mind you, this was filmed a year in advance, June 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of 1968. President Johnson's own schedule on June 1st, 1968, the day he was there of the first of 3 days of filming, his schedule shows him 1 hour helicopter flight away on holiday at his ranch nearby. Robert Emenaker, as far as I know, this guy is still alive. He was a science fiction writer and image consultant. Eugene Kranz, future flight director. James Webb, NASA administrator, former NASA administrator, who resigned days before the first mission. He didn't want to have anything to do with it, but he popped in to see it. Maybe they wanted him as a co-conspirator so he wouldn't blab about it. Joseph Kerwin, a future NASA astronaut. Never heard of him, had to look him up. Thomas Paine, didn't know who he was. NASA deputy administrator in 1968. He was there. Glenn Lunny, a former or future NASA flight director. Christopher Kraft, NASA Mission Control founder, one of the founders of NASA, was there. James Van Allen. This is why they are sending mannequins to orbit the Earth, because of the radiation. They'd have to go through a huge field of radiation in order to reach the moon and go through the radiation on their return. The radiation doesn't start until 1,000 miles up. The space station is 750 miles below the deadly radiation field. One of the clips at Sibrel.com is NASA's own scientist, Kelly Smith, saying the technology necessary for an astronaut to survive the radiation going through the radiation belt to the moon and back has yet to be invented. That's why there's mannequins going through that.
Is that where the Van Allen belts are named after? Is James Van Allen?
That is correct. He discovered them in the late 50s. They sent up probes in the 50s, and this is published in scientific journals. The radiation was so severe, it broke the Geiger counters. They vibrated so much. It's super deadly. Arthur Trudeau.
Do you know if there is any point on the planet that you could possibly launch a rocket from that you wouldn't get any radiation because there's theories and
Yeah,
speculation. Of course,
theoretically, you could launch from the North Pole or the South Pole where there's a hole in the radiation belt. The problem is when they launched the Challenger at 43 degrees, it was too cold for the sensitive rocket components and the thing blew up. So imagine launching an Arctic climate. It could not be done. It couldn't be done. So the reason why they launch in southern Florida is to be as close to the equator as possible, which you have to do in order to orbit the Earth. And then from there, leave Earth orbit. They just said 2 months ago, it's going to take 18 fuel trips to the space station to ferry up fuel necessary to leave Earth orbit and then go to the moon. Oh, funny, they didn't do that the first time they went to the moon. No wonder why they're faking being halfway to the moon and the footage I showed you. So we have General Arthur Trudeau, who was from Army Intelligence, and two people, as best as we could tell, Donald Simon was Navy Intelligence, and Grant Norrie was CIA, as best as we could tell. So these are the people who were there at the time. So we have four proofs. They can't have 1,000 times greater space traveling technology in 1969 than they do today. That's impossible to have greater technology in the past and in the future. That proves it. We have the shadows intersecting at 90 degrees. It can't be duplicated in sunlight. That proves it. We have the classified footage of them faking right in front of your eyes a 1-foot model of the Earth, pretending it's the Earth floating in space. That proves it. And then we have the deathbed confession of Cyrus Eugene Akers, who eyewitnessed it. If I said I eyewitnessed somebody kill somebody, they'll put them in prison. So there you have it. 4 proofs, 4 times the proof necessary to prove we didn't go to the moon. All of this is detailed in my book at Sibrel.com. And this is the sad state of our world. It's really, perplexing. When I popped in that tape and finally agreed that they didn't go to the moon after I had a guy with top security clearance tell me so, I still needed proof. And when I saw the proof that 2 news directors agreed, proved they didn't go to the moon, I just wept quietly. I'm like, oh my gosh, they really did fake the moon landing. How sad is that? We have a federal government that kills their own president. Not my opinion. That's the opinion of the dead man's nephew, Robert Kennedy Jr., who has more access to Kennedy assassination files than Oliver Stone. He says the CIA killed his uncle. Okay. Robert McNamara, who was defense secretary during the Vietnam War, which was started because of the, quote, Gulf of Tonkin incident, on his deathbed said that event, that Pearl Harbor, never happened. We made it up. That led to the death of 3 million people, including 58,220 Americans. So I think if the government is willing to kill 58,220 of their own people without cause, I think they're willing to fake an image on a television, right? So they did fake the moon landing. And then, of course, we have 3,000 architects and engineers who say it's mechanically impossible for a pinhole airplane to bring down a steel frame structure. All you have to do is look at the picture of the Oklahoma City bombing. Half the building was blown away and it did not collapse. So how could a pinhole going in and out cause the grid to collapse? 3,000 professionals signed a name, risking their reputations, saying, look, this is an inside job. It's not airplanes doing this thing. 20 years later, not a thing done about it. 75% of Americans say Oswald didn't kill Kennedy. Not a thing done about it. These criminals are running our government. It's a very dangerous thing. And then the second to the last chapter in my book is called NASA's Greatest Fear. Okay, I interviewed dead Apollo astronauts' relatives. I interviewed the widow of the man who was going to be the first man to walk on the moon, who told me after my 4-hour interview with her that her husband came home from work from NASA on January 26, 1967, and said, hon, for some strange reason, the CIA is all over the launch pad today. I wonder why. That's kind of weird. Never saw him here before. Next day, the guy's dead. His widow says the man who was going to be the first man to walk on the moon, was murdered by the CIA because he's a whistleblower. Not my opinion, opinion of the dead man's relative. So what we have here is our tax dollars are being used to not only fake the moon landing, it's being used to pay the salaries of CIA agents who are killing honest Americans for exposing their crimes, right? The first document of America is not the Constitution. It's the Declaration of Independence, which says when any government becomes destructive of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, they can be abolished. So, life. Our government is murdering their own people. Not my opinion, it's the opinion of the dead man's relatives. So, liberty. You have to ask permission to open your business, permission to go to the beach, permission to go shopping. That's slavery, not liberty. And then the pursuit of happiness. If they forbid you to go to church or forbid you to open your business and that's your happiness, then they're taking that away too. The government is not our master. Whatever happened to them being called our servant? And yet they're our master. They're telling us when we can go to the beach or not. It's our beach. It belongs to everybody. When I can open my business or not. I don't care if 4 out of 5 people are dropping over dead. It's your individual liberty decision to decide whether you want to take that risk and go shopping under those circumstances, or take that risk and open your business under those circumstances. They're not our parents, they're not our nanny, they're not supposed to be grounding us and giving us permission to do everything. That is slavery. You see, they're murderers, they're slave masters, and they're destroying the health and well-being of people, right? This is totally out of control. And so something needs to be done when you have the CIA murdering their own president and faking moon landings and starting wars without reason and doing 9/11 and blaming the boogeyman when we take an oath in the military to protect America against all enemies, foreign and domestic. We always forget that one. The biggest threat to America is not China. It's not Russia. It's people in the federal government who are murdering their own people and faking moon landings and faking 9/11 and faking probably the little thing we've been through for the last 3 years. You see, this is very serious. And the moon landing fraud, even though it killed fewer people than 9/11 or even the JFK assassination witness list, it's the one fraud that, if exposed, would enrage the public all the more. See, whoever killed Kennedy, he's still dead. Whoever did 9/11, they're dead. But the moon landing is candy. And we'd be taking away candy and giving the public a turd instead. I think that would outrage them. I think the news director was right when he said this is going to get a big reaction out of the public. But what he failed to see was he was afraid to expose the criminality of the federal government for fear that the criminal federal government would be brought to an end. And now what's supposed to happen? Otherwise, the criminals are at large. You see, we have to expose whatever the moon landing fraud in order to have honest government. And if we don't, we never will.
So that's basically what you did. You compiled this information, you had the classified footage, you had the faking of the pictures and all this, and you went to these astronauts and you asked them to swear on the Bible that they walked on the moon. Did you ask all of them that you possibly could interview to swear on the Bible that they walked on the moon?
Yeah, we tracked down all of them that we could. I think there's 8 of them. And some of them willingly gave interviews. I told them, I'm a filmmaker. I'm doing a documentary about the moon landings, which is true. I'm not about to say I think they're fake or know they're fake.
Yeah, then they wouldn't give you an interview.
What about talking to me about it? Then they wouldn't do the interview, right? So seeing how these guys are criminals and accessories to homicide, I think, the way that I did it is acceptable. With rare exception. And, I try to be a Christian. I'm a failure more than I succeed. However, the Bible does say not to take an oath. I think it's because it has kind of Illuminati satanic origins, right? Just let your yes be yes and your no be no. Jesus said so out of his own mouth. So asking these guys to take an oath, in hindsight, probably was inappropriate to do. Then the Bible also says to correct an older person gently and respectfully. Calling Buzz Aldrin a liar, a coward, and a thief, even though it's true, is not being respectful. I apologized to him, and then very next day or the same day, he ordered a copy of the movie. We have a photograph of it online to his address. Amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
When I apologized, it softened him up, and he got a copy of the movie. But the fact is, he is a liar, a coward, and a thief. And I've been a liar and a coward and a thief. I'm no better than him. For all I know, he's a more righteous person than me, except for this one thing. The thing that upset him was when I called him a coward. He's a liar for obvious reasons and a thief because we paid him $2,000 for an interview about something he didn't do, which is stealing the money. But what upset him is calling him a coward. But the fact is, he is. He is afraid to look bad. He spent his whole life telling all of his relatives and all of his friends that he walked on the moon. He made a living out of it. And he also keeps pulling stuff out of the closet that he claims was on the moon and selling it for $500,000 at Sotheby's. That's fraud because those objects were never on the moon. Not that they wouldn't be worth money as part of if the fraud came out. Maybe they'd be worth more. I mean, imagine encyclopedias that said the moon landings are real and the new ones say it's fake. I mean, the old ones probably be worth some money, And so a fake, a coin that says we landed on the moon, 50-cent piece or whatever, is probably going to be worth more money. But the fact is he's afraid to look bad. Now, Cyrus Eugene Akers did it the right way. If, as best as we can tell from the scriptures, if you confess your sin and renounce them, pledge not to do it again, you are forgiven. That's it. But think about this, writer. And all the time you've been watching the evening news, have you ever seen a news story in all that time of some bank robber who never got caught, or some murderer who never got caught, or some rapist who never got caught wanting to do the right thing and turning themselves in? I've never seen it. They go kicking and screaming to court. But that's all you have to do to live forever. And maybe because so few people are willing to do that, maybe that's why Jesus said, wide is the gate, broad is the road to destruction, and most people go that way. Narrow is the way to life, and only a few find it. It says God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Well, what is pride? Pride is simply the unwillingness to admit fault, that you're wrong. You see, the unwillingness to say I'm wrong. So that's going to stop people from inheriting eternal life. That's why the most important scripture to me is, what good is it to gain the whole world and forfeit your soul? Because as best as I can tell, even though it's technically possible for the world to get its act together and for us to make government honorable again, I don't think that's going to happen. And these people, as best as I could tell, they will succeed. They did a great job with Kennedy. They did a great job with the Gulf of Tonkin. They faked the moon landing. They did 9/11, and they did this little thing for the last 3 years. They're only getting better and better and better. I think technically they could be stopped, but I don't think they will. Everyone's too busy watching television, right? And they set it up that way. So these people will gain the world, and then they're going to be dead like everybody else and face God on Judgment Day. Cyrus Eugene Akers was smart enough to figure out, look, I'm about to die. My only hope of living forever after Judgment Day is to confess my sin, which is that he murdered a person. Now, you don't make that stuff up as you're dying. The main thing he confessed was that he murdered somebody. And then he said the reason why he did it was to cover up the moon landing fraud, which he eyewitnessed at Cannon Air Force Base in Clovis, New Mexico, June 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of 1968, chief of security, stood beside President Johnson holding TV cables the first day. President Johnson gave him the list we just read, said only these 15 people are allowed in the visitor's door, nobody else. We published that list. Some of these people are still alive. And to be quite honest with you, my book, which took 15 years to compile and 2 years to edit, while I'm editing the book, less than 2 years ago, I'm calling up Cyrus's son to confirm this information. One of the clips at Sibrel.com is his son's testimony, his own son's deathbed confession, because the deathbed confession of his father, which was videotaped, his house mysteriously burned down when the videotape was inside. And after I confirmed these details with his son, his house was mysteriously broken into and everything about his father was confiscated. And then 2 days after that, less than 2 years ago, government agents met with his son and said if he spoke to me again, they would kill him and his family. This is less than 2 years ago. So the government knows that if the truth about the moon landing fraud comes out, it will upset people. And the very next thing they're going to have to investigate, if it comes out, is the Apollo 1 fire, where their own relatives say they were murdered by the CIA. So not only did the government fake the moon landing, they committed homicides to cover it up. This is our federal government. They're too embarrassed to tell the truth about it, just like Buzz Aldrin. Too embarrassed to admit that he committed a fraud, when that, as far as I can tell, he needs to do if he wants to pass judgment day. You got to get that out of your system. I would rather look bad in front of people than in front of God. My pride is not worth throwing away eternal life. So
one that I found really interesting in your documentary Astronauts Gone Wild was Ed Mitchell from Apollo 14. He literally kicked you in the back whenever you're getting ready to leave his house. He like kicked you. And then another thing that was interesting is apparently, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you left a recording device in his house after you had left. Tell us about that.
well, it's not exactly a recording device. What happened was, and I can cue it up and show it to you through screen share again. Basically, interviewed this guy. They all want $2,000 an hour. I mean, it's like their standard price. So I paid them $2,000. They want to be paid in cash, paid them in cash. Isn't that interesting? They all demand $2,000 an hour for their time to be paid in cash. So we paid it. I got a millionaire backing me. And we set up a TV monitor and I showed him the footage that we just showed you of them faking being halfway to the moon. He turns beet red, gets super angry. Where did you get this footage? Get out of my house. And literally kicks me from behind as I'm packing up my equipment. Well, in the commotion of being assaulted by an Apollo astronaut, we accidentally left a wireless microphone on him. And my camera person, being a little, rattled by being assaulted, forgot to hit stop recording as they're carrying out the camera. So he puts the camera in the back seat of the rental car in the guy's driveway. The astronaut and his son are inside their house with the door closed, and they forgot that a wireless microphone is still clipped to the astronaut. And, they're a little, rattled too. So we're recording unintentionally the private conversations of the Apollo astronaut and his son inside their house with the door closed on the, wireless receiver and the back of the rental car, because the camera guy forgot to hit stop recording. 3 months later, the film secretary calls me up frantic saying, Bart, she's doing a transcript. Oh, do you know what they're talking about in their house? When you accidentally left the camera recording. I'm like, I don't know what. She says, they're talking about calling the CIA to have you assassinated. And I'm like, yeah, that's funny. She's like, no, Bart, they're talking about calling the CIA to have you assassinated. And I'm like, yeah, that's funny. She says, Bart, you're not listening to me. They're talking about calling the CIA to have you assassinated. Now, if you want, I'll cue it up. And
Yeah,
you can hear
I think this would be
crystal clear.
Yeah.
Him saying it himself.
Make sure when you hit screen share that you hit share audio as well, or we won't be able to hear the audio.
Yeah, or I think you'll hear my microphone, but in any case, share screen. Here's the main desktop one. I'll go to YouTube again, or Sibrel.com, get one more promo of that. So here's Sibrel.com. You go to Moonman video links, and these are a lot of really cool links. This one, if we got a little time left, this one freaks me out. I mean, this will blow your mind. Okay. Look at this underneath here. This is the national anthem sign off. Okay. That they did in the late 60s, early 70s. And when they go through the lyrics of the national anthem, subliminally blended in are the words consume, obey, consume, don't rebel against America, the government is your God, submit, obey, submit. Literally in the national anthem. They were doing that in the 1960s and 70s. Here's a more detailed explanation of the footage we uncovered. Here's clips of ABC, NBC, CBS repeating the same story word for word multiple times, proving that it's centralized media control. Astronauts Gone Wild, The Real Size of the Earth, a little comedy film I did, and I think this is at the beginning of it, but this is probably queued up to that segment.
We have a video camera running if you want to do it. All right. That would be great footage for us. See you later. Looking forward, I hope.
So I guess you heard that. You want to call the CIA and have him whacked. Well, here they are. They're literally talking about calling the CIA to have me assassinated, which would not be necessary if they really walked on the moon. I mean, why would it be, right? It doesn't make any sense. If they really walked on the moon and I'm some silly person who thinks it was done in a TV studio, why would they care? Why would the CIA have to kill some silly person who thinks Mickey Mouse is the first president, right? I mean, but if they really did fake it with the CIA, then, and I uncovered it and footage to prove it, the two NBC news directors agree does prove it, then maybe the CIA would have to be called in, you see? So just that threat, you could even call the fifth proof, because the CIA would not have to be involved in my assassination if I was wrong.
Do you think that they were joking and just messing around, or what? Do you think that that was like a serious?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely serious. That son, God help him, was kind of vicious. And there's a proverb. It says when a curse is issued against somebody, he issued a curse against me, a death threat. The Bible says when it's undeserved, it'll fall back on the person who issued an undeserved curse. It says they will fall into the hole they dug for someone else. 2 years later, at age 26, the guy died of cancer at a very young age. And so God help him. Why would the astronaut, if the moon landings are real, why would they even have the CIA in the Rolodex for one? You see, that doesn't make any sense. And again, the CIA was already tied in with the 1967 homicide of the crew that would have been the first crew to walk on the moon. And then the third time the CIA came up is on that list of 15 people, and one of them was CIA. So you have CIA during the faking of the moon landing. You have the CIA involved in murdering the crew that would have been the first crew because they wouldn't cooperate. And now you have the CIA mentioned a third time when a reporter uncovers footage of them faking being halfway to the moon. So this is very serious. They really did fake the moon landing. And I think it would be a grand, wonderful, beautiful thing for the truth to come out. Yeah, it might cause the stock market to crash, might cause the dollar to crash. The whole world will be ridiculing the United States of America. Yeah, they really did fake the moon landing. Well, that's really the only way we're going to get rid of corrupt government that I know of. You have to admit you have cancer to get rid of the cancer. You have to cut off a gangrene limb, otherwise the whole body will die. And our government is so far gone. I mean, I think when they killed their own president, in my opinion, that's the point of no return.
But it's almost like nobody cares. All those JFK documents that recently got released, now they didn't release all of them, but they released a lot of them. And it basically says that the CIA killed JFK and like nobody cares. So it's like
Well,
one of those
it's
things.
not.
It's one of those
Yeah,
things where it's like enough time passes between the event and then the government coming out and saying that people were right and the conspiracy was right about it, and then no one caring, right? And it's a very interesting, thing to me. It's just like the UFO phenomenon right now. Like since Roswell 47, people have been saying that they have been saying, the government hasn't been saying, people have been saying that they've been covering up UFOs and aliens, and then it took them until 2020, whether you believe that aliens and UFOs actually exist. I don't personally believe that, but people do. Uh, it took them until 2020 to come out and say that UFOs are actually unidentified objects and no one cares, right? It's really interesting concept. But before I let you go, I know we have a short period of time here. One thing that I found really interesting in the documentary Astronauts Gone Wild was Eugene Cernan, right, from Apollo 10 and Apollo 17. He didn't seem like he was lying at all, which I found pretty interesting. He was very forthcoming about the things that he was talking about. He was talking about, living on the moon and how the moon was like a second home to him and all
yeah,
this. And then he was very quick to put his hand on the Bible, unlike other people that you would ask to swear on the Bible. He was pretty quick to
but
do
the
it.
chat. Yeah, okay. For first, a couple of reasons. Let me go back to the first one. People do care. The media makes it look like people don't care. I mean, if 90% of Americans are against something, they'll talk about the 10% that are for it, if that's what they want to happen. And they'll interview 10 people who are in the 10% and one person who's in the 90%. You see, the media is being manipulated so that people won't care, and that fire that should be stoked by the press, which is anti-corruption fire, is not being stoked. People do care. It just looks like they don't care, and they're not being motivated by the media to keep caring because the media is completely manipulated. And then secondly, I'm a acting coach and I've been on stage about 500 times. I've taken hundreds of hours of acting classes and I've taught maybe 100 hours or more of acting class. Now, I went to a wine tasting seminar once, and the guy leading it could blindfold, take a glass of wine, and say it was from this area of this country. And I'm like, how could you possibly know? But he did. And I can tell you from my experience, Eugene Cernan had acting classes, different than the other ones. Mind you, he was on the last mission, so he had the most training. The shadows intersecting at 90 degrees are from his mission. Okay, his mission didn't go to the moon either, but I could tell from his style of lying that he had acting training. And sure enough, I'm right, because you said he seemed the most convincing. Not to me. I can tell distinctively he has acting training to visualize what he is talking about. The shadows intersecting are from his missions, so he didn't go. They never went. And if they could go, they would. If they could really go on the first attempt with 1 millionth the computing power of a cell phone, they would have been on Mars 10 years later and another solar system by now, and there'd be bases all over the moon. This is the only technical milestone in the history of the world that no one could repeat 50 years later, when it should be 100 times better 50 years later. Just 10 years after the atomic bombs are 1,000 times more powerful. So if they could go to the moon on the first attempt, well, like I said, we would have been on Mars 10 years later, and they wouldn't have to go back to the moon 7th time to practice for Mars, which is what they're saying. We need to go to the moon 7 times to practice for Mars. That's like being to the North Pole 6 times, but never being to the South Pole. And on the 7th mission, you go to the North Pole the 7th time instead of the South Pole once. It's totally illogical. They're admitting that they didn't go, and they say going to the moon is the first step to Mars and beyond, and that's why we're returning the 7th time. I mean, come on. So, also, little side note, when I was calling some of the people on this list that we just saw, I called up Eugene Kranz, flight director at NASA during some of the Apollo missions. And something a little strange happened during that phone call. Now, mind you, I've been to these astronauts' homes, and Cernan was the most fit of all the astronauts by far. And I think the youngest too. So the idea that that guy, died before the 50th anniversary, as several of them did, so they wouldn't have to deal with the conspiracy questions, you see, I find that a bit odd. And further, so I call up Eugene Krantz to ask him about his name being on this list. And the guy doesn't even say hello. I mean, he waits for the other person to start speaking. I think it's kind of a little weird. So I'm looking at the numbers on the phone go by, and I'm like, well, maybe it's a bad connection. I call back a second time, and he said, is this tech support about the satellite comm video call with Cernan? Apparently, these guys have military-grade scrambled satellite video phones in their house to talk with other people about classified things, and it was having technical problems. He thought it was tech support calling his landline saying, unplug it, reset it, count to 10 or whatever. What did he say? Is this about the satellite comm video call with Cernan? Eugene Cernan. He said this about a year and a half ago, and Cernan allegedly died 3.5 years ago. So apparently, Eugene Cernan is still alive. And I think if they can fake the moon landing worldwide in every TV station, radio station, and newspaper, then I think they can fake one person's death so he wouldn't have to deal with the 50th anniversary fallout of the conspiracy coming out. You see? Wow. And remember also, just because every TV station and every radio station said men were on the moon, they were really in New Mexico. So just because every TV station and every radio station says there's this illness going around doesn't mean it's true. And just because they say these numbers are the numbers of infections doesn't mean it's true. We just repeat the numbers the government tells us. What did the guy at Houston Control say? They're numbers going by on a screen. He can tell no difference between the numbers of a simulation practice flight and the numbers during a real flight. There's no difference to him. It's just a bunch of numbers going by. So you have a bunch of numbers going by being repeated by the media who is not investigating the numbers that are claiming they're 1,000 feet from the moon surface, that they're claiming there's 1,000 illnesses or 1,000 deaths of the illness. It's just a bunch of numbers. They were wrong about the greatest accomplishment of mankind was a complete lie, and every TV station and newspaper in the world was wrong or manipulated. What about what's been going on for the last 3 years? The media is not doing their job, not even close. The only thing they're doing is a puppet of a corrupt federal government, right? Because the corrupt federal government told all the newspapers that they were on the moon when they were in New Mexico, you see, and the corrupt government is repeating all these numbers, and NBC News told me they don't investigate any of it. They repeat what the government tells them. And the key people involved, they refuse to interview because they're critical of what the government is saying. That's not much journalism, is it? That sounds like communist propaganda. Oh, I thought we were in the land of the free.
I have one last question for you, Bart, and I'm going to let you go. And I want you to just entertain this thought for me. There's not a correct answer. There's no evidence to back this up. It's just a question because I'm very observant, right? I like to look for patterns within people. And through watching all of your films, Bart, all of these astronauts, they start getting pissed when you mention the Van Allen belts and the radiation, or mentioning that Wernher von Braun statements that it would take 3 rockets the size of the Empire State Building to get to the moon. Which the simplistic answer to that is, why they're getting pissed is because you believe in people believing that's watching it is that you're exposing the lie, that they didn't really want you, that we didn't really go to the moon, right? But what if they're getting pissed for a different reason, Bart? What if some of them are getting pissed because they can't tell you how they got to the moon? Did that ever cross your mind?
No, why would they care? Why would the methodology be relevant? It's not. The fact is, they're faking being halfway to the moon because they can't go halfway. And they all had identical equipment. So if my Volkswagen Bug cannot go over 90 miles an hour, then neither can yours. And so they did not go to the moon. It's that simple. Now they have a large group of intellectuals who are in the quote UFO community who look at the pictures and say, look, these are fake. These are taken in a TV studio. But they like believing in Star Trek, League of Planets. And then so they try to come up with some way that the pictures are fake, but they went to the moon anyway, right? Maybe that's because they're communing with aliens on the other side of the moon and there were secret crews. NASA doesn't care why you believe they have the capability to go into the moon, only that you do. It's like this last thing that went on for 3 years. There was one lie for the general public, which is that this illness came from an animal. Then for the more alert, critical thinking people, they said, okay, I'm going to let you in on a little secret. It came from a scientific facility. Well, they're both lies, because if the second one was true, they wouldn't have to fake the infections, which the inventor of the infection test said gives you a false positive 95% of the time. And they wouldn't have to call the decapitation from a motorcycle wreck a death from that illness, or a gunshot wound to the head, a death from that illness. And my own wife was the care provider for the first alleged death of that illness in our state. And she said he was already dying of cancer in hospice care. You see, so if either came from an animal, came from a scientific facility were true, they wouldn't have to fake any of that. It's fake. That's what the former vice president of the company selling the medicine says. That's his opinion, not mine. So if he says this is not an illness going around, you better believe it. He's a biologist, virologist. He knows all about that stuff. So the same thing with the moon landing. They so desperately want people to believe. It doesn't matter whether you commune with aliens, whatever. No, they're upset because I caught them. If I really walked on the moon and somebody thought otherwise, I would find that hysterically funny. I mean, if some guy came up to me and I really walked on the moon and he said, will you swear on the Bible? I'm like, sure. Are you okay? Do you feel okay? Would swearing on 2 Bibles, would that make you happy? But what it's like instead is like I'm walking up to him in front of his wife and saying, oh, your mistress says hello. Then he's mad because I exposed it. That's why they're mad. A sword with no point makes no injury, right? Why would they care? If I said they didn't go to the moon and they did, that wouldn't upset them. Why would they care? But the fact is, if you look at Astronauts Gone Wild, we have Buzz Aldrin admitting twice on camera that I'm correct. Just go to Sibrel.com, click on the top left button, go to the clip for Astronauts Gone Wild, and you'll see him admit when we show him the classified footage, number 1, he says, oh, and this makes you a famous person for having discovered this footage. What an ego you must have to want to propel your career as a reporter like this. Well, how could my career be propelled forward if it's not, proving the moon landings are fake, right? And then secondly, he said, well, you need to talk to the administrator of NASA. We were just passengers. Him and Neil Armstrong were passengers, not pilots, not landing. You see, orbiting the Earth for 8 days as passengers. And here we are, 50 years later, and humans can still not leave Earth orbit. That's why they're sending mannequins. Imagine Lindbergh. He flies across the Atlantic in 1927. And 50 years later, no one from any country on Earth has flown an airplane over the Atlantic. Nobody. But that's not true. They did it months later, and now there's millions and millions of aircraft flying over the Atlantic, thousands of times more complicated than that plane. The 747 was built with 10 years newer technology than the Apollo rocket, and it took 168 attempts to get the fuselage off the ground after millions of aircraft had been built. There has never been one machine and the history of aviation that ever got off the ground the first time. Not a single time, except the most complicated mission of all time. NASA has never kept a schedule, not a single time. Just to put a telescope into Earth orbit, they're 10 years behind schedule. They said in 2014, with 50 years better technology, we're going to have people orbiting the moon in 2018. That never happened. Add another 100% behind schedule, and they only have mannequins. NASA has never kept a schedule, except the most complicated mission of all time, right? You can't have a breakthrough of the technology to fly across the Atlantic Ocean and 50 years later have nobody who could fly across the Atlantic. It's never happened in the history of the world that someone dropped the atomic bomb and 50 years later no one can make an atomic bomb when they're so much more powerful 50 years later. It's the only time in world history that technology was greater in the past than in the future, which is impossible, which means it's a forgery. And that's simply the way that it is. I wish it were otherwise, but you have to face the hard facts.
Thanks so much for coming on my show, Bart. I appreciate you a lot. Where can people find you online? Plug your website one more time.
Yeah, just go to my last name, Sibrel, S as in Sam, I-B as in boy, R-E-L, Sibrel.com. You'll get my book, which has all this information that is not in my movies, about where the Air Force Base and the filming of the fake moon landing was happening, along with the deathbed confession of the person who eyewitnessed it. It's an audiobook that I read. It's also in Kindle or in print, and it's all available at Sibrel.com.
The links to Bart's information will be in the description of this video. For everyone else, thanks for watching and listening. Much love to everyone in the chat. Please be sure to hit the thumbs up button to help the channel and the YouTube algorithm. Share, subscribe, hit the bell icon as well for notifications. All the links to all of my information is also in the description. Please subscribe on all alternative platforms and the audio only version of the podcast too on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, Google, and anywhere else you listen to podcasts. And remember, we're not only in a spiritual war, but a war on humanity. Stay aware, stay alert, keep loving your heart for everyone. Stay safe out there. And if you can see through the illusion, you are the solution. See you guys next time.